Okay, I'll kick things off. Good evening, everybody. My name is Dr. Tim Grunland, and I'm one of the organizers of Douglas Week 2021. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you here for what should be another great panel after Monday's fantastic panel, the first of two Unsilencing Black Voices panels. And this panel, My Ireland, should be excellent. It's part of, well, a whole range of activities that we have going on this week. You can find out more at douglasandcork.com. There are several strands: historical strand, literary strand, educational, music, creative. We even have a sports strand, some sports events on Saturday. So you can find out more there, and you can sign up for everything for free through Eventbrite. I'm just going to say a few words of housekeeping here. You should be aware that all events throughout Douglas Week, including this one, will be recorded and available for viewing in the coming days. You can submit questions throughout the panel through the Q&A box at the bottom. Our team will be monitoring those and passing them on to the panelists, and I understand the questions are going to be answered towards the end of the event. So please keep them coming in throughout. And yeah, I mean, I suppose I should say that our aim throughout, we started talking about Douglas Week maybe 18 months ago when it was just going to be a small on-campus event, and it kind of ballooned beyond what we really had expected. And now it's a whole week of online activities. And one of our aims from the beginning was to really think about Douglas's time in Ireland alongside contemporary Ireland, to think how can we make connections between Douglas's experience in Ireland and his struggle against slavery and his experiences throughout his lifetime and his activism. How can we connect this with contemporary Ireland and think about these sort of contemporary echoes of that struggle? And I think, you know, the implications of that are pretty obvious, and the connections are pretty obvious with our guests today, and that's exactly why we invited them to come and host these events for us. So I'll introduce Sandrine and Catherine now and hand over to them, and they'll say a bit more and introduce you to the rest of today's fantastic guests. So Sandrine Ndahiro is our first host. She is an English PhD student in the University of Limerick. Sandrine's research centres on third-generation African writers such as Afrofuturists who have emerged during the era of late liberalism and who've introduced multiple and nuanced perspectives for reflecting on African lives and aspirations. She recently co-produced a documentary entitled Unsilencing Black Voices, which details personal stories and accounts by members of the Black community in Ireland. Sandrine's work now highlights the need to pay attention to the lived experiences of the Black and Irish community with her recent publication of an essay called Irishness Does Not Mean Whiteness. And that is on queermedia.com, I think, if I'm correct. Viewers can find that there. Catherine Osikoya is a fifth-year architecture student in the University of Limerick. Catherine's thesis research is about finding the correlation between colonialism and cultural identity and how in turn that impacts built environments in the context of Nigeria. Unsilencing Black Voices, the documentary which she also co-produced, was formed as a response to the injustices that happened in relation to the Black Lives Matter movement in the US and how we too face similar, albeit different, experiences in Ireland. And we look forward to hearing more about those experiences now. I'll hand you over to Sandrine and Catherine. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Tim, for the introduction and for all of the viewers today and our panelists. And welcome to our second event titled My Ireland. So just before we kick things in, we're just going to introduce all the panelists. So I'm just going to call you by name, and then if you could just introduce yourself just quickly to the viewers, and then we'll continue on. So the first person there I can see is Eva.
Hello. Hi everyone. My name's Eva. I'm a fashion design graduate based in Limerick, and I guess like what kind of links me with all this is really that like a lot of my fashion designs and work is based off like my culture, my background, the fusion between like me coming to Ireland and like my whole family having to, I guess, adapt to a more European culture. And yeah, so like I'm a fashion design graduate that kind of infuses a lot of African influence in my work. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Eva. Up next is Ashley.
Hi, I'm Ashley. I'm a second year journalism student at the moment. I'm also the co-founder of the Galpal Collective, which is an arts collective for young women, people of color, and queer folk. And yeah, I'm a writer and producer, and most of my inspiration comes from mine and my peers' lived experiences.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Next is Ola.
Hi everyone, my name is Ola, or you can call me Ola. I'm mostly known as Ola anyway, and I am an Irish language broadcaster, public speaker, and also filmmaker as well. I also do a bit of voiceover artist as well. I wear many different hats like that, and you can often see me on TV or hear me on the radio speaking about a whole range of topics, including politics and race as well. So I'm really happy to be here, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. Next up is Joy.
Hi everyone. My name is Joy Tendai Kangere. I'm a co-founder of Rooted in African Island, which is an organization that instills cultural identity into young people. I also passionate about women and children's rights, and also a lifelong learner and advocate for adult learners in Ireland. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much, Joy. Next we have is Vicky.
Hi guys, my name is Vicky. I'm also known as Vicky Inspires. I'm a social media influencer and I'm a mom of two. I'm really passionate about women's rights, and I'm an advocate to the injustice that Black people face, hence why I'm here. And I've been in Ireland for 24 years. I'm trying to count, 24 years. So thanks for having me here, and I can't wait to jump on this.
Thank you so much, Vicky. And last but not least, Emer.
Hi, how are you, everyone? Nice to meet you all. And again, thanks for having me. I'm a secondary school PE teacher and I'm an activist for Black Lives Matter. I have a group, an activist group here in Bray, and I'm also a TV presenter on Homeschool Hub. I'm working with the INTO and Sports Ireland and Olympics Ireland and making and devising modules for anti-racism so that teachers can have training at the primary school level and secondary school level on understanding equality, understanding race versus ethnicity, and having a look at their own unconscious bias as well as privilege. And with my work with RTE, I've had the opportunity to create an anti-racism video for primary school that is relatable to Irish children.
Thank you so much, Emer. And sorry, apologies about that. We have Diane. She's the last speaker there. Apologies for that, Diane.
That's grand. Hi, everyone. My name is Diane Ndahiro. I'm a social worker. I'm also the co-founder of Rooted in Africa and Ireland. And I advocate for different things, but some of them is the abolition of direct provision. And I'm a good troublemaker, as I like to call myself. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. So I'll leave it now to Kathy.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Kathy Osikoya. I'm going to start by reading a piece written by Christine Kinley in regards to Frederick Douglass and his experience in Ireland. I seem to have undergone a transformation. I live a new life. The warm and generous cooperation extended to me by the friends of my despised race. The prompt and liberal manner with which the press have rendered me its aid. The glorious enthusiasm with which thousands have flocked to hear the cruel wrong of my downtrodden and long enslaved fellow countrymen portrayed. The deep sympathy for the slave and the strong appearance of the slaveholder, everywhere evidence. The cordiality with which members and ministers of various religious bodies and of various shades of religious opinions have embraced me and have lent me their aid. The kind hospitality constantly proffered to me by persons of the highest rank in society. Now, this piece is what is going to be the basis of our panel this evening. So the first question that I'm going to ask, it's going to be asking people what their reaction is to the specific piece that I've just said. So this question is open to everyone. So what was your initial reaction to the above reading?
Sorry, is that just to everybody?
Yeah, the floor is open to everyone.
Okay, I'll go first. I found it very interesting, to say the least, that he felt so welcomed, and in his own words, that it was the first time that he actually felt like a man. And when you put that in contrast with current situations, as far as, you know, ostracism and how we are seeing that there is such a lack of representation for the Black mixed community within Ireland in so many ways. It's kind of mind-boggling in a sense that back in the 1800s that a Black man was so welcomed and treated so well. But yet here we are in the 21st century still trying to fight for equality for us, for ourselves. I started really contemplating and thinking like the era and time that he was in Ireland. And it was right about when the famine was beginning in Ireland. And it made me wonder, like, did anything come into play with the fact that the people of Ireland were going through a struggle? And I find sometimes when people are struggling, that you tend to see life at a different level. The realities and the importance of life become different. And I feel like right now, the fact that we're going through a pandemic has been the most enlightening time for so many, and it has allowed people to really open their eyes and their ears to be able to acknowledge and take on board the racism that is throughout the world. And I wonder if at that point in time, the people of Ireland, whilst going through an epidemic within their country, had nothing but love for others and acceptance, the same way that they would wish, you know, should they travel, and which we did, in turn on coffin ships. But I thought that it was so striking that so long ago we seemed to have that love and acceptance in our hearts. And what has changed over the course of the years was it that we adapted to other countries' ways in dealing with Black people, people of color, and mixed people. Was it something that we were just influenced so much by, and that over the course of the centuries that we took on board that same racist mentality of underdogs and people that are being lesser of a human because of the color of their skin or their origin?
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree. I mean, in relation to everything that you just said, like, we have gone backwards from the 19th century. And because, like, we had this slang where it was like Black, dogs, and Irish, where we had that communality where we were all experiencing the same thing. So hence why we were loving each other like brother and sister. But now, when we have like reached the age of like globalization where everything is like gone forward, and people of don't want to say this, but people of the Caucasian race believe that they are more elite than they previously thought. I just find it kind of remarkable that we've gone backwards in when we should have actually gone forwards. So I'll call on you, Ashley, next. What do you actually think?
I think the thing that struck me the most is that obviously back then we had this shared history of colonization, and it was almost like trauma bonding, like this recognition of that we've been through the same thing. Like our, I guess, enemies were from colonialism, and it's kind of heartbreaking to see that over the years, you know, like back then, like Irish people weren't considered white, and that switch in which when Irish people attained their whiteness turned on us and began to adopt all of the racist ideology that was being fed to them, when like not even that long ago we were in the same boat. And I think that's the key. Like, I think if we got to a point now in which in society in which we go, you know, there's so many similarities in what our respective countries, what our respective people went through. And there's just a lack of compassion, which is just like so heartbreaking to see.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you. And also, like, with the rise of like social media and stuff, that's also had a major impact on like how people are being treated at the moment, because once you see something, you want to emulate it. So people think that this is the way that it should be when it actually isn't. So the next person I'll go on to is Eva. Thank you again, Ashley, for your comments, and Emer as well. Eva, what do you think?
I guess when I read it at first, I did find it interesting, like just the way that he said, various shades of religious opinion have embraced me and lent me their aid. And I guess it's very, I'm bouncing off what Ashling and Emer said here when I'm saying that, like, there was that common ground in terms of like how Irish people at that time were under British rule, and they knew what it was like to go through that, I guess, to be marginalized, that feeling of being tossed to the side in society. So I think when Douglas like visited Ireland in 1845, I guess when he came in and he was perceived quite well and accepted and heard and listened to and embraced, was because people were looking at him as almost like that's a bit of a success story, a little bit, the way that he was able to come out of slavery and start to use his voice to really like represent everyone, really, in terms of like anyone that was being marginalized. So I feel like when I was reading it, I really thought that, like, I guess Irish people, when he came to visit, looked at him and was like, oh, we can relate to that. Like, we can relate to a bit of that struggle. Like, we're being tossed to the side here as well. So I guess that's why his voice was accepted. But in comparison to today, I guess there's not that same type of struggle happening. I guess Irish people of today aren't going through that same struggle. So I don't know, I guess I found it interesting just in comparison. I don't know, I just thought it was very interesting, really.
Thank you, Eva. I'll go to Joy next.
Thank you, Catherine. So for me, it was three things: was regression, resonation, and also a false sense of belief. If you change the date to the 1st of January 1846, I also arrived in Ireland on the 1st of January, and the fact that it resonates with me in that like the welcome that I got in Ireland was so fantastic. And you know, that was a transformation for me, because it was like my first experience of coming from and having grown up in South Africa during apartheid, and also witnessed the segregation in Zimbabwe, and saying, look, for the first time, you know, I'm in a society where a white dominated country accepts me in the fullness. And what I've witnessed is, from that part of welcome, it's like the progression that was there in society, we've now regressed, and it is very interesting, or it needs to be analyzed why we have moved, you know, from that in 1846, you know, everyone was seen as equal, and now there is so much division on how people view each other. And sometimes I look at for myself, my question is, did I fall into a false sense of belief? Did I make that first, you know, wonderful Kate Miller Fulcher that, you know, would have welcomed Douglas when he came to Ireland? Was there any undertones that can be related to that time and now? So those are the three things that really struck, because it would have been anyone coming in the time that I came in, which is nearly 20 years ago, that was, you know, that was not visible what we're witnessing. It's like going through a different island, that this is not the island that I thought that I was leaving all the segregation and all the hurts of division too. So that's what the passage resonates with me.
Thank you, Joy. I'll go to Diane next.
I absolutely agree with everyone, because I think back then a Black man was a Black man who's escaped slavery was like a beam of hope, that of something that can happen for Ireland. But also there was this commonality of, you know, somebody who knew what it meant or how it felt like to be dominated. Douglas understood what it meant to have someone else rule your life and decide on every decision of your life. And in a way, the Irish people saw that as a commonality. But also, it's funny because there was an article that was published in 1999, and the title was "Welcome to Dublin, unless you're Black." Um, so it's funny that, you know, back then, Black people came to Ireland as passing. You know, they were just coming in, you know, to study, or, you know, they had a place to go back to. But in the 90s, Black people came to live in Ireland, and there was a shift of mindset within the white community that actually, oh, Black people aren't just tourists. Black people aren't just people who are going to come and go back to their country. They're coming to live and stay here. And it was kind of a shift in a mindset of how they saw Black people. So definitely, I think for me, it was definitely reading the article, reading his words. I can definitely understand what he meant, and I can see how we've moved on from that place, because we are not just passing by, we're actually living in this country, and something happened that, yeah, we're not seen as, yeah, there's no commonality anymore.
Yeah, I just think it's very interesting how that shift happened. I mean, it went from a welcoming place to a place where people are scared to live, and like people are being persecuted. And I just it's very interesting to see, like, in what period did that shift happen. It just probably takes further analysis to look at that. I'll go to Ola next. What do you think?
Hi, yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate what other people were saying as well, I found it very surprising when I hear that Frederick Douglass felt very comfortable in Ireland in those times, because I've always felt like the Ireland of the past was, for me personally and my family, was the bad part, really, because when my parents came here in 1997, they were not welcomed, and people were not happy to see people like my parents at all. But as time has gone by, I feel like people are happy to see someone like me on the street. Now, that's my experience anyway. And I do feel comfortable in Ireland now. Like, but the Ireland I grew up in was a different Ireland to the Ireland that I'm experiencing now. And I did not really feel comfortable to be in my skin when I was growing up in Ireland, you know, in the 2000s and 90s or whatever. And for me, it's changed. And although obviously we have a lot of work to do, no doubt about that, I do feel happy with the Ireland I live in right now, because for me, during the Black Lives Matter protest, I found people that I went to school with so interested to hear our voices and so interested to hear about these issues that their minds were opening up. And for me, that was progress. And I hope people keep that attitude going forward, because that's what we need. That's the change we need. And as I always say online, you know, the change starts with the young people. The change starts in our schools. The change starts with our teachers. I see so many friends now that actually that are studying to be teachers, actually want to know about what is it like to be a Black kid in a class, actually want to know the right term to use. So, for example, someone recently asked me that's training to be a teacher, what do you think about the word girl, did a girl, which is Black person in Irish? And I said, I don't feel comfortable with that. And I've always said that that I don't feel comfortable with did a girl. I prefer did a dove or did a la da. I feel those terms are a lot more catering to nowadays. Whereas did a girl is more like referring to the olden days of kind of like blueback. And it's also seen as Negro in the folklore of O'Donnell as well. So I feel like people are really opening up and really want to start this conversation. So that's really how I felt. And just to reiterate back to Frederick Douglass, I find that maybe possibly because he was coming from America as well, that kind of brought an excitement to Irish people as well, maybe. Because a lot of Irish people at that time, you know, went to America. So it's a bit exciting, like, oh, someone from America as well. So I think it's very interesting, definitely.
Thank you, Ola. And I'll go to the last person. I'll go to Vicky. What do you think about that statement piece?
Hi, I think the statement piece is very interesting. I can relate with what everybody said, but one thing I want to like say out loud is I feel like Ireland has regressed immensely because if you look at this thing, we're all saying about the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020 in May when George Floyd died, and everybody like worldwide and even in Ireland, we're all like, you know, Black Lives Matter. Well, 6 months after that, George and Kencho died on the 30th of December. And I know that he had mental health problems, which his family have said, and the fake lies and things that were said about him and how some Irish people reacted to it really hurt me. I was kind of like, where is this coming from? Were we not 6 months ago just protesting like, you know, Black Lives Matter? How are people saying this? Like the lies and the things that are written about him and everything, and how he did deserve to die, and the far right and this and that. And I'm like, really, is this where we live? It kind of makes me feel, to be honest, uncomfortable as a mother of two kids. I'm like, if I came to Ireland when I was 6 years old and I noticed my own kind of racial stuff early on, the first time I ever heard the N-word was when I was 6 years old. And a man with like white gray hair told me to go back to my own country. I remember the taxi driver that took me and my mom and my siblings from the airport. He said, listen, there's some racist people here in Ireland, but we're not all like that. And he was a really nice man, to be honest. But it's just stuff like that. It's kind of like, when is this actually going to end? Do you know what I mean? I kind of feel like it's a cycle. It's been going on too much. And I kind of know that our generation, this generation at hand, are probably going to be the ones that are going to actually have to stamp this out, like, finally. My hopes and my work that I do is for the generations, the future generations, so they really don't have to go through this. So we don't have to keep regressing, and we can just keep progressing and going forward, but not regress.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you on that one. Very heartfelt. I've said it to Sandrine multiple times, like with the death of George and Kencho, you really got to see what Irish people really thought about black people in Ireland. And like few of them were only doing the Black Lives Matter as a matter of fact of what everyone else was doing on social media. So they're just being like social media activists. And then when the issue was no longer there, they no longer care. So it's just very, very heartbreaking to see that this is what they actually thought. And like, despite the fact that he had mental health problems, he was still a human being and their families were grieving. And it's just something that people need to understand. Like, in a time of grief, like, you need to come together as humanity, not differentiate between amongst race, because we're human and we all live on the same like Ireland together. So why is it so hard for people to understand? Anyway, okay, I'll go on to the next question. So the next question is, Douglas felt like he was at home in Ireland. His skin color was black and Black voice were not scrutinized and judged. Is this something that you identify with? Okay, Ashley, I see you're ready to go. I'll go with you first.
It's a tricky one because I find in certain circles that I do feel really appreciated and that my experience is really valued. But I think like I spent the majority of my life being the one black face in like almost every single space. Like in primary school, me and my sister were the only two kids the entire time, black kids the entire time we were in primary school. Like that's and the only people of color. And there was an ongoing thing, and even in secondary school, of when something would happen and I would be visibly uncomfortable and would speak up, like somebody saying the N-word when they weren't supposed to, or just saying stuff that was just like disrespectful towards black people, and I'd speak up, I was always shut down. And I remember there was an incident in which somebody like dressed up like it was like a house party, and somebody dressed up as like a black trans woman as a joke. And when I voiced my discomfort with that, and I was like, you can't make fun of black people, you can't make fun of trans people, everybody was like, oh, it was just a costume party, you're taking it too seriously. And I find like even now as I'm an adult and I'm in college, that it's still an ongoing thing. Like I'm still always getting that pushback when I'm saying, hey, hang on a minute, like I don't like that. Like that's not okay to do. And even with people who mean well, even there's a lot of people who say, oh no, you were right for that. They don't speak up for me. They don't, in those situations where I'm uncomfortable, they'll just watch and then afterwards go, oh, you were right. But like I could have used your voice in that situation. Luckily I found my tribe of people who will support me. But it shouldn't have taken me 18 years of my life to discover people who are willing to stand up for me and to stand up for Black people and just to stand against blatant disrespect. So yeah, I don't know. I got lucky. Some people haven't found those. So yeah, I don't know. It's a hard one.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. It really does depend on the people who you like associate with. They'll make you feel right at home in the place that you are. But as you said, it shouldn't have taken you that long to find that, because like if we're in a society that is well integrated, they should be able to accept people for who they are and not like to kind of like make issue with it. Like yourself, I was also like myself and my sisters were the only ones in the primary school and secondary school all the way going through, and it was just kind of hard, you know, because like I would be chilling with them and no like other Irish person wanted to chill with me because I was different, and we're the only new African people on the block. We're like, oh, we don't know where they're from, do they have rabies or blah blah, you know, all the kind of stuff that children would say at that stage. And it's just really heartbreaking because like at that age you're a child and you just want to make friends, and you know, you don't know any different. You're just like, okay, I'm a person, this is a person, let's be friends. But because of the indoctrination of the parents from their parents coming into the schools, being like, oh, that's a certain person, you shouldn't play with that person. But we have to ask ourselves why. You know, like when children are born, they don't see color. Like if you go to a play school, a child will play with another child. They don't care if that child is black, white, blue, green, you know? Okay. I'll go on to Diane. What do you think of that?
I think absolutely. Because the truth is that we all judge different. We all hold judgments for things that look different. And unfortunately, as a legacy of colonialism or slavery or patriarchy or all the powers that be, Blackness is judged negatively. So, for example, like we see it all the time. Like Black men, you know, if you see a Black person, a Black men are judged as thugs or a danger or something to be feared. And all these, you know, all these misconceptions that we hold, we consume them from somewhere. We consume them from media, from information passed down through families, from friendships, from unchallenged behavior or thoughts that we have against people. And so I think we're definitely judged by how we look. And unfortunately, Blackness is judged negatively. I'll just give you a few statistics. For example, like the Black people in Ireland, we 1.4%, but 3.2% of the prison population is of Black people, and mostly Black men. And for example, I'm a social worker, and families of African descent are 20 times more likely to be taken into care than Irish population. We do know the mortality of women giving birth in Ireland. We do know that Black people are judged. I'm not excusing behavior, for example, prison statistics, but I just want us to think of the systems, of the structures that judge people because of how we look. And as I said, because of the legacy of colonialism and slavery, Black people are judged negatively. So yeah, we do see like on the street, you know, you pass the Black man, you know, if you ask any Black person, every Black man on the street, they'll tell you how they've passed the white person and the white person has clenched on their purse. You know, that white person has judged the Black man simply for existing. We do know how Black women are judged as loud and as you know, all these misconceptions stem from somewhere. And you know, if I stand here and say that I'm not judged by how I look, that would be a lie in general, because we judge different, and different in this incident is Blackness. And I think our job isn't to establish whether we're judged. I think our job is to change the narrative of how we are judged as a Black community.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. That's exactly right. I feel like people have these preconceptions of what Black people are and how we act and stuff, but you can't paint one entire race with the same brush. Like each individual person is different. So like if you don't want to approach someone because you have these preconceived notions of them, then you're in the wrong. I mean, like it literally only takes you like 2 minutes to talk to someone to see what they're about and see if they're your type of person that you want to associate yourself with. So the last person I'll go to is Vicky. What do you think of that question?
Why are you going to do this to me? Hopefully I won't get too emotional this time. I'm an emotional person, as you can clearly see. So about that question, I remember when my brother was in primary school and he was in like first class. And he had this friend that he really got on with. And I remember one time he went into school and his friend was like, I can't play with you. He was like, why? He's like, because you're Black. And my brother, that was the first time my brother actually ever found out that he was Black. Like he didn't know he was Black. And I was like, coming to him, I was like, how did you not know? And he's like, I didn't know. I feel like you are saying you're not born showing that, oh, this child is Black, white, purple, green, or blue. It's from the parents, and you're learning from home. And that's why it's the parents' job to teach your children so they can be a good person in society. You know what I mean? Because as Diane said, Black people are judged. Black is seen as like dirty or uneducated, or especially if you have an accent. Whether, let's say, like I'm always told you have a very Dublin accent. Oh, where are you from? You speak like I can understand you, kind of a thing. Or if someone has a bit of like an African accent in their accent, they're judged kind of like, oh, do you what are you saying? I can't even understand you. So we really need to strip things back and re-educate ourselves in so many ways. There's so much work to be done, but now's the time to do it. And that's me done.
Yeah, exactly, Vicky. Just to reiterate that point, it is basically from the parents that are teaching the children, like, this is good, this is bad. But if you can teach children from a young age that, like, you should be inclusive to everyone, play with everyone, like, no one person is better than the other, like, that is how we'll move forward. But it's up to our generation now of people who are growing up to educate our kids who are going to be coming in the near future that it's okay to be Black and he's okay to be white, and it's okay for you to be friends. Like, there's no differentiation between the two of you. I mean, like, you're white, you're special, you're Black, you're special. And that's the way that it should be. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Sandrine to ask the last 3 questions. And thank you, ladies, for those beautiful answers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you so much for everyone so far with what you've been saying. So just the next question is, this will just go towards Ola, Emer, Joy, and Eva. So this is, why do you think it was easy for Douglas to feel at home in Ireland in 1845? And yet it is almost impossible for Blacks to feel that way in today's Irish community. So I'll start with you, Ola.
Yeah, again, like I was saying, I'm very surprised that Frederick Douglass felt comfortable to live in Ireland in those times, because, to be honest, from what I know, when, for example, Nigerian students came to study in Ireland, maybe Trinity College during the 60s, they weren't welcomed even then. And there was a lot of racist attacks then. And there were, from what I heard, racist murders too then. So I'm very surprised, to be honest, that Frederick Douglass felt comfortable. But to be honest, I feel like that's changed, because I think it's almost a thing like what I was saying from the 90s, when that inward migration was the peak in the late 90s and a lot of people came to the country. I feel like Irish people were almost like, whoa, what's happening here? Like, we're not used to this. We're used to people fleeing the country, not coming into the country. So it was like a quick change, and it happened fast as well. So I think for a lot of people, they didn't know how to deal with it. And there was a lot of ignorance, and a lot of racism came from that ignorance too. But saying that now, you know, it's been a good while since the late 90s. And, you know, it's time for a lot of people to kick in with themselves and to understand we live in a global economy. People have the right to move wherever the hell they want to. So it's really time for people to really realize that and to just accept that too, that, you know, you can be Irish and you can be a person of color no matter. You know, we grew up here. We're part of the system. We're part of the society. So I don't want to hear that question, where are you really from? You know, I'm sick of that question. I'm sick of talking about it even. And I made a video documentary about this, what does Irishness look like, a few years ago, and it went viral and it went everywhere and it got people thinking, it got people challenging their notions. And a lot of people told me, you know, I'm actually not going to ask that anymore. I didn't know that it was an ignorant question. And it's just, I just really hope people kind of snap into themselves and just realize that we're Irish. And like, you know, if you see someone walking down the street just because they're black, why are you assuming they just moved here yesterday? Like, I find that I find it so confusing. And I'm just like, where have you been? Do you not know Ireland is multicultural now? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. And it's really frustrating because it literally happens every other day. Now with the pandemic, thankfully, I don't have to face these ignorant people, except online, obviously. But it's just, I just really hope it changes. And like, I was even working on an article recently about recognize us for our work, not our race, because that's another thing I'm sick of. You know, I don't want to be talking about my race in the media all the time and that kind of stuff. I want to talk about lots of different things, and it shouldn't matter just because I'm black. You know, I have so many other interests as well. That being said, obviously it's important to talk about these issues, but there's so many other things we can talk about too. So that's how I feel.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like, I like your take on it. Exactly on stating that we are more than our race. And I think it's something that we had talked about on Monday, like with how, like, you should see me as Sandrine first, as a side to your black friend Sandrine. And it is something that I think all of us have experienced, especially I had to laugh with that question, where are you really from? Because like, as I said, like, I always make a joke about it when someone asks, I'm like, Carlo, and they're like, no, but where are you really from? Like Africa, and just walk away, because it's up to you to figure out of the 54 countries where I'm from. So definitely it is something that, yeah, like as you stated, like when you do see a black person, it's very, very ignorant to just assume that, yeah, fresh off the boat and like Ireland is their first place now. So definitely. And then I'll come to you, Eva, next.
So I guess this kind of brings me back to what I kind of said at the beginning of like, back in like 1845, you have to paint the picture of like the Irish society back then. They were marginalized as well, and they were going through the struggle. And I think the reason that why it's harder, it's getting more difficult in today's society, is because I feel like Irish people today are not able to understand the struggle, because it's something that their great grandparents went through, or their ancestors went through. And, you know, that's not their struggle, because they claimed their home back from, hello? Oh, sorry, I got cut off there. They claimed their home back from British rule. So essentially, they don't really understand that level of, like, they're not able to sympathize in the same level. So that's where the communication kind of cuts, and that's why it's that bit more difficult to connect, to struggle when you haven't walked in their shoes. Not excusing it by any means, but I just think that's why Douglas was so appreciated back then when he visited Ireland, and that's why it's so difficult now, because there's that huge disconnect. Because now a lot of Irish people that are born and raised here and are like white Irish, they have their land, they have their grandparents here, they have their cousins down the road. And as for us, like, our families are scattered all over the place. So it's like there is that bit of disconnect in terms of like in different areas of our lives, there's obviously that disconnect. But I just find that there is just, in terms of like a common ground, it just doesn't really like it's harder to connect with us, I guess, or understand our struggle because you haven't walked our shoes. But back then, there was a bit of that understanding there because they were able to look at Douglas and been like I said in the beginning, like we have gone through that element of, you know, being marginalized and we're impoverished and, you know, we're under scrutiny as well and we're tossed to the side of society. So yeah, that's my kind of stance on that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Eva. And like, yeah, I like your take on that level of disconnect. And like, I always think it's important, like when it does come to the issue of racism or equality and diversity, it's kind of like you shouldn't have to have a Black friend or a Black girlfriend or anything like that to understand racism is wrong, like just on a human level. And I think when you are talking about that disconnect, it's just that humanity. Like there's that dehumanization of the Black people still in Ireland, like where you just can't understand, like, no, that's a human being as opposed to just a Black figure. So like definitely that disconnect is there. And I'll come to you next, Joy.
Thanks, Sandrine. So my thoughts on this is based on three main things. And firstly, it's as a history buff, I always like going back to history. So it's hidden history, denial, and the third one is the total throw off or the forgetting of the Brehon laws. So in terms of hidden history, the history of Ireland has been told to suit the Irish narrative in, like you're saying, as Eva has said, that, you know, through time, there's that forgetting that even, you know, the early Black people that came in, you know, it's not, I always find when people say that Black people have been in Ireland in the early 20s, and I'm like, have you read your history? You know, like past 20 years, where you go back and you see, you know, interracial relationships, you know, happening, and, you know, Black women thriving within Irish society. So it always goes back and it ties in with colonialism, where, you know, the hunter tells the story of the lion and everything else that is not, doesn't suit the narrative is left out. I've been advocating recently that, you know, when we've been watching Douglas Week, and my son who's in secondary school highlighted, like, you know, Daniel O'Connell had, you know, welcomed Douglas, but we've never been taught. That has been left out, whitewashed out of Irish history. And something like that is so important, especially for children to recognize that there were people like them in early history. So you're coming in and you're thinking, oh gosh, this is, you know, we've just come to Ireland and we're causing a nuisance. But yet, if that show of someone, you know, if even a picture of Douglas was shown in history books, that would actually change the whole educational scope and give children in schools confidence to be where they are. So that what we're saying is that the hidden history, that everywhere in the world, we always have, you know, even the fact you look at the story of the hidden figures, that it's only in recent years that is shown, and it just puts back anyone that feels like or identify as Black feels, you know, they haven't accomplished anything, and it really it changes. And that's why I feel that it's, you know, Black people find it difficult to fit in now because the narrative that has been existed. And I'll move on to the denial, and that's the denial of the existence. I think Ola talked about students coming in from all over the world, you know, to study in Trinity, to study in the Royal College of Surgeons, to study in the Bar of Ireland. There have been people, you know, if you go into these institutions, you'll see graduation ceremonies where there are Black people. But if you don't look for the information, you're not going to find it. And this has gone to the fact that, you know, we have people of mixed heritage who are of African descent who will be the first people to come in. And you can even see the whitewashing of it, you know, through the report of the mother and baby homes, where, you know, where testimonies of horrific treatment of people that were in the mother baby homes, and it's whitewashed and been told that there was no discrimination. And from someone who hasn't faced discrimination and doesn't understand, you know, that the whole abuse was more intense because of the color of the person's skin. And also just in terms of the historical background of the Brehon laws, at one time, the Brehon laws have, you know, if you do legal history, that there were very advanced laws that were in Ireland. And sometimes I see it that it's, you know, it's so much connected to let's say, cultural beliefs of African and Japanese. And I've just picked up one of the, and I'll read it here. It was one of the laws that governed the people of Ireland. And it says that whoever comes to your door, you must feed him and care for him with no questions asked. And that was the true Cade Miller culture, that, you know, you didn't. So if that changing, that people have forgotten, so people would take in. And another one that I would like to highlight is that it is illegal to give somebody food that has been found with a dead mouse or weasel in it. And I'm just reminded about the situation in direct provision. You know, if we still had the Brehon laws, that way of treating, or people seeing the difference and not being in modern day Ireland, wouldn't be the same. And I think because in 1846, people had the memories, there was people that still had the memories of the Brehon laws, so that they were able to extend that vision of that a stranger like Douglas had come onto their shores, and they were able to feed him, you know, and give him the reception, because he was a stranger that was not supposed to be turned away. So that is my thoughts on why we have moved, you know, the forgetting of history and the lack of emphasis of looking into the past.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Joy. I loved your take on history. Like, I did my undergrad in English and history, and like you, I do remember, like, the only time I ever came across anything to do with Africa wasn't until I was in fourth year doing contemporary African literature. So, and like, even in history, like, until I was researching for an essay on the formation of Irishness, did I even discover that Black people actually were there before the 2000s. So like, you are right, like, there's no, and like, it does play into that, because like, as I say, like, I always thought that Black people coming into Ireland is this new phenomenon. And like, as you stated, like, you've clearly pointed that out, like, it's not. And again, that's because it's not in history books. So like, unless like you're researching something, then you are made being like, okay, like, I can kind of understand why there's racism, it's only something new. But as you pointed out, like, it's not. And like, that is then, it calls for that importance then of kind of decolonizing the curriculum in Ireland and incorporating a lot of Black history, like, where it shouldn't just be 1 month we're doing it, that within books, then Black kids can grow up in Ireland. I just know, like, we're more than slavery, we're more than colonialism, and then just how we have been interconnected, let's say, just in Ireland and other parts of Europe. And last but not least, Emer.
Joy, you absolutely rocked my world just there. The stuff that you said, it just hit home in so many levels. So much accuracy. Thank you for that. Somebody did write there where can they find all of our work, and I just wanted to say that my work, everything that I have done, is all on my Instagram. So I would have done a lot of videos about personal experiences in my childhood and growing up. Way too much to even start to express here. So my handle is Emer O'Neill 14 if anybody wants to go and see that, because there's just so much content to discuss. It's so hard to do it so quickly. I wanted to just talk about, first of all, the whitewashing. I feel, Joe, you hit the nail on the head there. The fact that Frederick Douglass is not a name that I've known. I'm 35 years old. I'm born and raised here in Ireland. My mum's from Wexford. My dad's from Nigeria. I went to primary school in Ireland, secondary school in Ireland. I was the only person of colour in both schools, of like nearly 800 kids. My town is Bray, and there was about, I'd say, 5 people of colour in my whole town. And that's what I grew up with. And I'm astonished by the fact that, like, Frederick Douglass is a new name for me in adulthood. It just goes to show that as an education system in Ireland, we are not doing a good job. You know, we're not using people of colour, Black people and mixed people to show the intelligence, the intellect that is out there, the skill, the amazing feats that people of colour and Black people have accomplished in their lifetime. When we study poetry, when we study, you know, literature, it's always white literature and white poets. The movies we watch, the main character is white. In our books, the protagonist is always white. The superhero is always white. Since a child, that's what we learn all of the time. In all of my school books, as many of you who have gone to primary school and secondary school here in Ireland, everybody is white. In our worksheets, everybody is white. And so it's almost like promotion of Caucasian or whiteness, and erasing or whitewashing, as you said, Joy, of Black heritage in Ireland, which only in this last year did I realise we have so much Black history here in Ireland, and I did not know, and I would have loved to have learned about that in school. When I speak to people and I say that together, you know, I always say we have a lot of learning and a lot of unlearning to do. We need to acknowledge, you know, our privilege and our unconscious bias. And I say things like that. And I tell you why I say we, because I have grown up as a white person, in my opinion. I have been taught that everything good is white and that everything Black is generally not good, just like the black cat or the clouds, dark clouds. You know, everything we learn is that, you know, Black and dark is not good. And I just feel, when you think of Frederick Douglass, I read that he said that he said, I will unite or work with anybody that wants to do right, but I will not with anybody that wants to do wrong. Now, when I started my activist work 9 months ago, and I only started 9 months ago because I was always afraid to speak out. Anytime beforehand in my lifetime, I've been told that I'm pulling the black card or that I need to get over myself and just have a bit of crack, and it wasn't that big of a deal. So I learned very early to keep my thoughts to myself. But I think his statement of working with anybody that wants to do right, because he got a lot of hate because he was working with white people, and he was working with white slave owners also. And the Black community were not happy with that. And I was actually targeted by African Americans because I was doing a lot of work with white people here in Ireland. But the difference is racism in every country is so different. It is obviously a universal language, but it presents itself very differently in different countries. Our country is predominantly white. If I was to not work with white people in Ireland, then I would have nobody to work with. It doesn't make sense. Our fight is completely different to the American fight. We have to have Irish white people speak up and be vocal and take this as their fight. We need to fight together as brother and sister and as one. And I just found that even back then, he was held accountable for having dealings with white people, even though that is what we want. It's a union of the world. It's not Black versus white. It's union. And what we want is not Black power and, you know, white power. What we want is Black and white power. We want both the same, equality. We want to be recognized in the curriculum here in Ireland. We want to be recognized in the media. We want representation throughout in our civil services and government positions, and things that they're no-brainers. Like in the 21st century, to think that you have I think it's like 10% of ethnic background in the Garda Síochána, which is absolutely ridiculous. Like I might actually be even saying too much, that there isn't even 10%. Not to mention within the government, like TDs, like we don't have anybody to represent us. And as kids, you know, like somebody said, that Black people and Black men specifically in Ireland are looked as thugs, and, you know, their physique is big, they're strong, athletic, they're dangerous, they're loud. But every person that they see in a position of leadership is white. They don't ever see themselves represented to be able to feel safe or to feel like, I know that whatever situation occurs here, I will get the benefit of the doubt because I have somebody that can relate to me and understand me, that when I'm maybe speaking loudly or using my hands as gestures, that I'm not being rude, that's just how I speak. And, you know, the mother and baby homes, like you touched on that as well, Joy, and it's so heartbreaking, because one of the most disgusting things that have come from that is that children were basically looked at as if, are they white passing? So if they were white passing, they could be adopted. If they were not white passing, they would forever be in a mother and baby home. And me for one, I came from a single parent family. I'm very close with my mom and we share everything. And she shared with me that when she returned from Nigeria pregnant with me, she was a voluntary nurse working over in Nigeria, and she got pregnant with me. But she did contemplate giving me up for adoption because she had no money, she had no job, and Catholic Ireland in 1985, even just being a single parent, to just being a white person with being a single parent was absolutely taboo. You couldn't nearly even get an apartment. Like, a lot of people wouldn't even rent to single parents, let alone a single parent of a black child. And she figured that maybe someone else could give me a better life. But she was told when she went there with me that, in fact, I would never be adopted. The chances are that my skin would be too dark and I would go from care home to care home until I aged out when I was 18. So hearing about the mother and baby homes now, it's so raw, and it touches me deeply, because it could have so easily been me. And so many beautiful children just lost, no statistics, no nothing. We have no idea. And Hispanic race, Asian race, they were all of those ethnicities were all just meshed into just being black, and it's so shocking. There's so much change that needs to happen in this country. And somebody else said that we just seem to be going around and around and around. Frederick Douglass was trying to work with white people to, have equal terms and try and work together. And so long ago, and look where we are still now in Ireland. So it's important that now it's not talking, but it's change. It is absolute change in every orifice of the word. It's enough talking. First, we have to talk about it, because I do believe that a lot of white Irish don't think that there's racism in this country, and they need to understand that there is. And I think by us telling our stories, it helps that. Even listening to you, Catherine, talking about school and your brother, like, it breaks my heart, but I feel connected to you now, and I feel connected, like, the things that I went through, they matter, and I wasn't alone. And it's important for us as a community, I think, to all hear each other's story. But their next steps, once the people of Ireland realize that the racism is here, is the changes that we are going to continue to make, and the fight that will forever be in our lifetime every day. It's not a 10-year thing. It's not a 15-year thing. It's going to be for our lifetime, for our kids' lifetime. I have 2 kids. I expect that it will be in theirs. And, my dream then is that my grandkids perhaps will know an Ireland or a world that they don't know personally what racism feels like to experience, but in fact will only learn about that in history books or by asking older generations. And I'm sorry, that was very long-winded, and I'll stop now.
No, thank you so much, Emer. I think both you and Joy touched a lot of that, and I liked your perception on that whole sense of allyship, because I do think it is something that we've seen, like, when it comes to the moment of like things like Black Lives Matter. It is really important to kind of take Black Lives Matter in the context of the Irish context as opposed to the Americas. So, like, within Ireland, like, we still haven't come up with like vocabulary or anything like that to kind of explain racism and all the different institutionalized or like microaggression or anything like that. So it can appear to be like harmful at times, like when we do just borrow what America is doing and put it into the Irish context. And as you stated, like, change happens when everyone works together, and it just can't be a black and white thing. And within Ireland, like, even with the Black Lives Matter movement, it just wasn't about Black people. Like, it highlighted the racism that happens with travelers, which has been happening centuries, and it's not a new thing. So it does really prove to be harmful if we just reduce that Black Lives Matter to just oppression of Black people, because within the Irish context, it just created so much more nuanced and things that we really need to look at before we can even start. As you stated, like, that change is going to take time, but it can only happen if everyone works together, as opposed to creating that divide that's already there in the world between Black and white. So just quickly, we'll just go on to the next question there. So with this question, it'll just be directed to Diane, Ashley, and Emer again. So what interactions have you had where calling Ireland home was questioned? So this should be interesting. So I'll go back to you, Diane.
I'm laughing because, like, that's just every day. But I'll give you 3 examples. The first one, last year I went to the UN in Geneva to talk on the Committee of Eradicating Racial Discrimination. And as we entered the UN building, like, white people went by and they passed. The second group of white people went by and they passed. And I came in, and obviously I was with the Irish delegation. They knew that on that day, the Irish delegation was going to speak. So they knew I was from Ireland. So I was the only Black person in that group. So as I came by, security men came towards me And they asked for my identification, asked for my passport, asked for everything, like, do I belong in that building? And I had just seen white people pass by. No one asked them anything. But by virtue of being Black and appearing Black, people assumed I wasn't Irish. This was a committee of eradicating racial discrimination in the UN. Just goes to show how, like, we can't escape from it. And another example is I was in college last year in Trinity College, and the very first day we were in class, and the lecturer came in, and this is a master's in social work. So this is a social work course, and the lecturer came in and he looked around and he goes, "Oh yeah, I can see a few, a few faces. I can see a few international students." Again, I was the only Black person in class, and the lecturer turned to me and he goes, "Oh, like yourself, where are you from?" Like, this is a class full of 25 white people. The very first Black person you see, you assume they're not Irish. And we had a few international students that just came in that really weren't Irish, but nobody thought about asking anyone else. The very first question that came to mind was the different girl, the Black girl. And again, I was othered, just assume that I'm not Irish. And also, like, I work with, different people. Just a few days ago, I was in a taxi and this person had picked me up from a social work building, and so just having conversation. They're like, "So where are you from?" I'm like, "I'm from Tala." "Yeah, but where are you really from?" "I'm from Jobstown." "Where are you really from?" Like, those kind of questions. And this happens every day. Like, I don't think there's anything we can do for people not to assume you're not Irish, because for so long the Irishness has been correlated with being white. And as I said in my first presentation, it's about how do we change that narrative. And we can only do it, as you said, Sandrine, by showing people that I'm not just a Black person. I'm Diane first before I'm a Black person. I'm the Irish Diane before I'm the Irish Black Diane. And yeah.
Yeah, no, Diane, I can resonate there with you, because like in college, I've always been the only Black person in all of my classes. And yeah, the first thing it's like, "Oh, like, did you find like registering really hard?" I'm like, "I've been in UL for 8 years." Like, yeah, no, I know where it is. But again, like that, and like that goes to show that, as you stated, like, Irishness is still linked to whiteness. And even if you're like, "Yeah, I have my Irish passport, I'm from Carlow, where no one knows where there is," like, how many times would I have to say that I'm Irish? So like, yeah, that is something that is always there. And I'll come to you next, Ashley.
I mean, it's like a when have I not? Like, it's the constant, because and part of the fact, like, I'm from Tala, but I also don't sound like I'm from Tala. So sometimes people, like, they'll be like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm from Tala." And they go, "Oh, really?" And I expect the "oh, really," because my accent doesn't match. And so I say, "Oh, I grew up in Rathfarnham before we moved." They go, "No, but like, where are you really from?" And I don't know how to answer that, because I was born here. And so my mom taught me this trick. So I used to then answer when people said, "Oh, are you really from?" I was like, "Well, my mom's vagina." Like, that's the furthest that I can go back. I've never been anywhere else besides here or there. But I think the worst instinct of it was, I was going on a drama exchange to Portugal, and there was, I think, 7 of us, and 2 of us were Black girls and everybody else was white. And one of my friends was making very inappropriate jokes in the air, like very inappropriate jokes in the airport, where I was like, security probably should pull you over for that. But he got through, and we were the only 2 issues he had through with security. She got taken off at some point. She came back, but like, we're not even 100% sure what happened. But I went up and he saw my passport and looked at it confused. And then he was looking for me on the no-fly list for about 10 minutes. Because he could not believe that I would have an Irish passport. Like, the thought was just like, it was literally impossible. And it was that my drama teacher came along. She had our documents to prove that we were there in an exchange, but she didn't even need to show them. When she stood by me, he was like, "Okay, you can go." So I think that was the most extreme example of it. But yeah, it's everyday little things like that. Somehow Blackness and Irishness are separate things. And I think partly in school, we do need to start teaching that, race and ethnicity and nationality are 3 separate things. It is very possible to be Black and to be Irish. My race and my ethnicity and my nationality are not. the same. And for so long they were, because of like globalization just wasn't a thing. But now that it is, we have to like just deal with the fact that there's Black Irish people and there's Asian Irish people and there's Latina Irish people, just as there's white Irish people. And identity is going to keep changing as globalization continues, because I could move to Australia, and my kid could be Australian. They may decide that they're Irish. They could decide that they're Zimbabwean, because that's where my family is from. And just getting to a place in society in which we go, people's identities is their business, and we should just not care about what somebody chooses to identify as.
Yeah, no, I love your analogy there, like with the passport, because I think when it does come to like Irishness being questioned, like, because for me, like if I go on holidays, I'm like to Spain or anything like that, well, before COVID was a thing, and like if I'm like from Ireland, like everyone, like no white person would ever question me. It would literally just be like, oh, what part of Ireland? And I'll be explaining Carlo, showing them the map. But it is then like in Ireland, like as I stated, like I've been here since 2006. Every single time, like if I get on a bus, like an old person be like, oh, how are you finding the weather? Yeah, it's still freezing, like, so it is that sense of like, why is it in Ireland, is it like the only place where like that Black and Irish, Afro-Irish bicultural identity is not welcome, while other places, like if you go anywhere, once they hear you're Irish, it's like, oh yeah, like my dad went to Kerry, this, we're all connected with that Irishness, yet it's still questioned. So like, yeah, no, it definitely like, and that passport analogy like definitely just reminded me of that. And then I'll come to you, Emer, just real quick before just the last question.
Yeah, no, I played basketball for Ireland, and it's just you reminded me of something there actually, because we one of the times that we traveled to play in a European Championship, when we were there, they asked for my passport from the head coach. So they didn't want anyone else's passport, but they wanted mine, just to make sure that I actually was Irish, and they weren't like bringing like an African American, like, and just like pretending that I was Irish or something. And they didn't tell me when we were on the trip, but they told me when we got home, and like it really, really upset me, because it's, just again, I was singled out and clearly made to feel like that I wasn't Irish just because of the way I looked. I was on the late there on Friday, and Ryan Tuberty asked me about the question of where are you from, where are you really from, and I just explained that I have no problem with the question, because I ask people that too. I think it's a great conversation starter if you don't know people. But the problem I have is with people's answer to the question, being that when I say that I'm from Bray, again, then I'll get, but where are you really from? And then I'll say Wicklow, and yeah, but where are you like actually originally from? And I'm like, Ireland. But I know exactly what they want, because I've had this so much in my lifetime. But when I say that, then my dad is from Nigeria, then I'm told, oh yeah, so you're Nigerian then. And I'm not Nigerian. I'm Irish. I'm mixed with Irish and Nigerian. Unfortunately for me, my dad wasn't around, and I didn't have any of my Nigerian influence, nor did I have any education on my Nigerian culture or background. So for me, it's almost like people want to take your cultural identity away from you, and having to constantly explain yourself and your Irishness is just so draining. And I don't think people quite get that. And I did, since the interview, get some hate mail, which I'm quite used to now at this stage. I've been harassed like horrendously over the last 9 months because I won't stop speaking out about everything. But one of the things is, again, somebody asked me, well, like, if I'm white, and if I go to Nigeria, people will ask me where I'm from. So it's the exact same thing. And like, here goes the gaslighting, get over yourself. It's normal. So what, you're trying to tell me that 2 wrongs will make a right? There's so much, instead of people taking the information in and understanding it, it's always met with a, yeah, but either being, gaslighting, where you're told that it's just a joke, take a bigger crack, it's just a question, it's no big deal, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the language and understanding, to be able to sit back and take it in as a positive thing and learn from it, and not take it as a negative.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emer. And like, yeah, no, like just to elaborate on like with that question, like on where are you really from? I was talking about it with my friends. We're like, how do you determine when someone is asking genuinely versus when they're literally just asking, as you say, to gaslight you or just to be like, where are you really, really, really from? And like, I always say that for me, I know it's probably wrong, but I always look at it through age. So I think with old people, I'm kind of like, might give you a pass if you're just genuinely asking. But like, when it does come to people our age, I'm just like, no, like I'm not the first Black person you've ever met, like, you know, so with that, but like, again, like it does go into like, when can you determine that language when it is just a conversation starter versus someone trying to other you within Ireland? As we've all stated, like Black people have always existed, so it's not a new phenomenon. So just before we go to the Q&A from the audience, I just want to ask a question. So just the last question, and this will just go for everyone, but if you could just try to answer as quick as you can, because there's a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I really want to get through to them. So just, so I'll start with Eva. So again, this will go for everyone, but I'll just start with you, Eva. So what can we learn from Douglas's time in Ireland that can be applied to contemporary Ireland as we move forward? You were just on mute.
No, there you go. I guess in terms of Douglas himself, him being a Black man, is that he was vocal. He spoke out, he told his story. I guess he sympathized with the Irish people at the time and the situation that they were going with. So I guess in terms of Black people today, I know like the whole BLM started like last year, you know, during the summer. And I think everyone was really hyped and everyone had that energy to, you know, show up and tell their story. And I guess as the months have come by, there's a lot of drain. It gets very tiring, as Emer had mentioned, and it gets very exhausting. But it's kind of trying to keep that like fight going and trying to keep that energy going throughout. And that's exactly what we can take from Douglas himself as a character, that he dedicated his life in speaking out. And I think us as young Black people, I think it's easy to get demotivated. And especially when, you know, there's like we've all gotten that whole thing of like, oh, you know, you're over exaggerating or you're playing the Black card, or like we've all gotten a bit of that. Like I know sometimes like I've had my own experiences of like, okay, Eva, you're taking it too far, or you're making things uncomfortable and you're making things awkward. And like, quite frankly, like I'm sick and tired of making people feel uncomfortable just because I'm speaking out. So I guess that's one thing that us as Black people, we can take. And I guess as white Irish people, what they can take from that time is that, like we've said before, is being able to try and understand, at least try and educate. You won't know the stories if you don't listen. You won't know the pain if you don't try and like just to listen out to our stories. You won't know if you don't seek, really. And I guess that's kind of one thing that we can really take from that time, is just that like Douglas had that energy to go into it all and really dedicate his life, and not, I guess his energy was consistent throughout. And I guess that's kind of what I would say in terms of like people that are speaking out a lot about this, is that to keep that same energy. And I guess with white Irish people, it's to be able to really listen out, and rather, instead of just like treating it as a thing that was a trend, which I find that very upsetting, is that like, you know, it was essentially a trend. It was a trend of summer 2020. And then now we're in, you know, 2021, it's no longer a trend. So I think it's kind of being able to relate to us and listen to our stories. I guess that's the most practical thing that we can really take from this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eva. And then I'll come to you, Joy. So just with a few sentences on what we can learn from Douglas's time.
Thanks, Sandrine. I think being authentic, it's the most important thing. Douglas came and showed who he was. Stand proud, be who you are, and people will respect that, you know. And just talking about Irishness, I've quit you know, trying to say I'm Irish. I'm an Irish citizen with Zimbabwean heritage, and that doesn't take away my Irishness, because Irishness is not just, you know, having roots, but it's what you feel in your heart. So that is it. Be who you are and be authentic.
Thank you so much, Joy. And then I'll come to you, Vicky. So just within a few sentences.
I actually did a live, an event with Sandrine last week on Gurm TV. And Bashir said the words, unmute. And I really think and I feel it's the time for us to unmute. Like, I'm at the point where I'm like, I'm not sorry that you feel uncomfortable, that I have to call you out on your racist behavior. I feel like we need to educate ourselves, whether if you're Black or you're white Irish, as to how to change things. Because I remember, for example, when I was growing up and I was a teenager, or not a teenager, when we were younger, and you used to say the words like, oh, that's so gay. You can't say that anymore. Like, we've changed that narrative, that it's a word you cannot say. So there's still certain behaviors and certain things that people need to stop doing. I just would really say educate yourselves and to stop dismissing people's feelings on how and what you're saying about them. If you hear it, for the past hour we've been on this, a lot of people have said that, sure, it's only a bit of banter, or so it's sure you're taking it too much, or stop dismissing people's behavior. Stop, like, how people are reacting to the hurt that you caused them, you know, that you need to be like, stop saying like, oh, I'm sorry that you felt bad, but, and stop putting the but, because you're completely dismissing what somebody's saying. Like, you made me feel this way. You're like, yeah, I'm sorry, but we need to go back to the Céad Míle Fáilte Road that Ireland was when he came, and when, for example, I came in 1998 and it was so loving, because what December showed, the 30th of December, when George and Kensho died, it's not even about like, was he right or was he, it's how people reacted. That's disgusting and it's vile. His family, what the hate mail and just the stuff that people put online, it's disgusting. We really need to change and go forward, because some of us are mothers and some of us will be mothers someday or have kids in Ireland, and their fear is kind of for them. Will they still be going through this? Will you still be getting asked where are you from originally? Because you speak properly or you look a particular way. We really need to stop it. Because what I've personally found is people that are like well-traveled and like outside Ireland and they're Irish are more inclined to accept us. Like if you say, oh, I'm Irish, they're like, oh, are you from South Dublin? Are you from South Dublin? Do you know? Whereas it's people from at home here in Ireland that are like, when you say, oh, I'm from South Dublin, for example, they're like, oh, where are you from originally? That question needs to stop. If you're ready for people to call you out on your behavior, that's fine. You can continue to ask people that question, like, where are you from originally? But from me personally, I'm going to call you out on it. And that's me doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vicky. So I can see that we've gotten a lot of questions. So we'll just start with the questions now. So Kathy, you can start asking the first one.
Yeah, perfect. And so our first question comes from Mary. She says, were there not also Irish people at the time who endorsed slavery and were also slave owners? I'm not sure. I would think that Ireland was a non-racist country. So I'll go to you, Ola, first. What do you think?
Yeah, that is right. Mary's right there. It has been known that Irish people haven't been slave owners, particularly. That's why you see a lot of people like in the Caribbean, for example, that have Irish surnames as well. So it is true. And I think a lot of people forget this. And there's always that narrative, oh, the Irish were slaves too. No, that's not true either. So we really need to debunk a lot of these myths as well, but also address that this is true. This is in Irish history that the Irish were slave owners also. And I think a lot of the time people feel that, oh, because Ireland was colonized, that, you know, there wasn't any racism. Irish people can't be racist. No, that's not true at all. Of course the colonized can be racist. Of course minorities can race against other minorities. And that's another thing that, you know, I love to touch on as well, that, you know, other minorities in Ireland do race against other minorities. And that's another problem that we don't talk about enough. And quickly coming back to that question of Irishness again, my Irishness has been questioned by actually other white immigrants in Ireland too. So it's a big problem, and there's a lot of anti-blackness everywhere is what I'd have to say, really. But that is very true what Mary said, and you know, we really need to teach people about this as well in our schools and to know this as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ola. So, so just the next question. So just again, just a few sentences because we just have a lot of questions to get through. So I'll come to you, Diane. So besides parents, what role do schools' educational system have in addressing racism and anti-racism in Ireland?
I think it all starts with, as I said, changing the narrative of what it means to be Black, changing the narrative of what it means to be Black and Irish. Because if we continue with the way the system is working, we're only contributing to the problem. And by changing what it means to look like me and be Irish from the education system, it means kids are going to grow up actually knowing who they are, because at the moment we have kids who really are confused about their identities, and that begins from school. So we need to talk about, as I said in the beginning, difference should be celebrated. Difference is good. Having this colorblindness mentality is part of the problem. So talk about race and racism in schools, talk about race and racism in your streets, at home. Talk about it, because by talking about it, that's the only way we can change the narrative of what it means to be Black and race and racism everywhere. So talk about it and change the narrative. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We'll go to the next question there. So this question comes from Joanne. She says, can I ask if they think TV and media was a part of the change of attitude in Ireland towards Black people? So I'll target this question towards Emer.
Hey, thank you. I think so. I think the media has such a huge role in so much of what's spewed, and I would say hugely linked also to like a lot of right-winged nonsense. When you think of Georgianchenko when he was murdered, I got an influx of messages because I posted about it, wanting answers and saying aloud, which I did. I did not know the race or color of the person. All I could think of was, this is unheard of in Ireland. What the hell happened here? This is insane. And I got an influx of messages with fake news, the guy with the sliced face, and people telling me, you do see what he did to this innocent man, blah, blah, blah. Turns out to be a football fan from, 4 years ago or something. On top of just the nonsense that is just spread and spread and spread. And because there's so many people that are on the fence, and somebody made a really good point there, I think it was Anthony, Jack. He had said something about when we have people of color take places of leadership and become powerful, how do we stop white people and the rest of Ireland not getting spooked and falling into that right-wing rhetoric, and I think it's a great point, because it's like, it's only going to take one more bit of information to make somebody say, no, do you know what? These Black people are ruining our country. They're taking all our jobs. And we've seen it. And we've seen it in Dublin when council houses were given to people that were not Irish born, but they had been on the waiting list for years. And so much racism came out of that. Like, they're stealing our houses. They're taking our jobs. And because there's so many keyboard warriors behind just typing away with not a lot of facts and just trying to stir a pot, it's somewhere that we have to be so careful in both parties. Even from ours as activists, we too need to be careful that the information that we are also sharing is correct and factual.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Emer.
Yeah, so the next question is, I'll come to you, Joy. So how do we support people in direct provision and lobby together for humane treatment for our asylum seekers and refugees and immigrants? So just real quick.
I think it starts with understanding, and this is the reason that, just having the humanity first perspective to looking at things, because sometimes, people have their own stereotypical way of understanding people. So we need to start from basics, understand why people do come to Ireland, why do people come and seek, to start new lives. And I think it's also going back to the fact that there's a lot of people that want to understand that people that are in direct provision can speak on their, for themselves, and they just need to be given the platforms to speak, not to infantilize grown people, or not to understand that these are people that have come in, that have had a level of education, and that all we need, what is needed is allyship. So knowledge, allyship, and giving people the voice to advocate for themselves.
Thank you so much, Joy.
Okay, so I'll give this next question to Eva. So it says, this question comes from Anthony. It said, when one reads about Frederick Douglass, they're introduced to a character whose title was an American social reform / abolitionist, not an African-American or Black social reformer / abolitionist. This both highlights and poses the question as to whether identity politics hinder or promote an individual's sense of self and individual expression, or does it enforce group identity tokenism? Can we establish group identity under an umbrella term in an attempt to allow individuals to self-identify without being asked, but where are they really from? Very, very great question. Great question. What do you think, Eva?
Very best to answer that. So like, I think it kind of stems back to what was said throughout the chat, was really that like, we are like, our identity is, yes, our race is part of our identity, but who we are and the mark that we decide to make in this world counts a lot more. And just as Anthony had mentioned there, that like Frederick first, before he was a Black man, he was a abolitionist. So he was a reformer, and he like stood against inequality essentially. And that's the most important part about him. He wasn't just another Black man. And that's why we're talking about him today. And in terms of like establishing like a group identity, I think that's the main thing. It's like for us to focus on, of course, having these conversations, but also being able to make our mark in the world, to be like, let's say for me, fashion is necessarily my area. And like the way that I would like to leave my mark in the world is to tell my story through my fashion and through my designs. And that's essentially my identity and my way of making my mark in the world. So I think as much as it's important to have these conversations as Black people, I think it's also important to make your mark in the world and to step back away from labeling yourself as Black and having to explain yourself, but also just to put your mark and be like, you know what, it's enough for me to just be a fashion designer. It's enough for me to be a lawyer. It's enough for me to just be a doctor. It's enough for me to just be a teacher, rather than being a Black teacher or a Black lawyer, or so on and so forth. So I think it's important to have that balance of being able to identify yourself, but without having to always constantly explain yourself. And I guess that just comes through time as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eva. So the next question here goes to Ashley. So so this was from Akira. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. So are Irish people actually white, or is white just a social construct? So in the US, Irish immigrants were encouraged to embrace social construct of whiteness in order to serve the interests of white ruling class. So however, is white an actual social construct when it comes to Ireland? So just real quick, if you just your thoughts on that.
I think it can be both. I think it was a social construct that was created, but it exists through lived experience. Like we can say, oh, like racism exists, like we're all the human race, but obviously Blackness exists because there's a unique experience that we have that other people don't go through. Same with if you're Asian, same with it, like even it's the same with nationality. Like there's a difference between being Irish and being Lithuanian, and those things, those are social constructs, but they exist because of lived experience. So I think, yeah, like I think Irish people are white, but whiteness was created. They don't have to be separate from each other.
Yeah, thank you so much there, Ashley. So I'll leave it to you, Catherine.
Okay, so I'll pass this question to you, Vicky. So this question comes from Quiva, and she says, is there any advice on how to show solidarity to contribute to the anti-racism movement in Ireland that goes beyond tokenism, that is truly meaningful and impactful?
Okay, sorry, Catherine. Can you repeat that again? It's long. I was trying to answer in my head. Can you?
Okay. She's basically asking, is there any advice that you can give to show solidarity to contribute to the anti-racist movement in Ireland that goes beyond tokenism, that is truly meaningful and impactful?
What I would say is, I would say call out your racist family. Like, you see, like Sandrine, for example, when you said earlier, you kind of have to screen them. And if they're older, you're like, okay, I'll just give it a pat. I think it's kind of like, we have to get to the point where if your friend or your family member or whatever, even your colleague says something that's racist, and even if whether you're white or black, but especially if you're white per se, call them out and be like, that's not okay. I think it was Ashley said it earlier, was it Sandrine, that somebody had said something and they said, oh, I agree with what you said, but it's kind of a bit late if it happened last week or last month or 2 years ago and you were standing right there. Do you not remember the whole, like, when we're in Ireland, growing up, I always remember these words. We're always like, oh, sure, I'm not getting involved. I'm not getting involved. This is the problem. You need to get involved, especially if you see bad things happening or saying, you know, you need to really get involved. So then we can move forward and stop regressing, going forward and going back. So call them out. That's what I would say. And have these conversations and stop being so offensive, again, defensive, you know, because I remember, for example, when George Floyd died, some people were like to me, oh, sure, that's just an American thing. Sure, that doesn't happen here. 6 months later, whoa, George and Kencho gets shot down. They're like, what the actual? And then people are like, it just became like this race thing, if you know what I mean, because we just don't like talking about it. We have to stop because times are changing and things are changing. And you can't be like, oh, I have a black friend. Do you know, like my black friend Sandrine, I'm going to use this because you said it earlier. My black friend Sandrine, sorry, I'm not racist, sorry, I have my black friend Sandrine. Yeah, we need to stop this. Or I have a mixed race relative or friend or niece or nephew. I'm not right. No, we have to educate ourselves. I'm sorry, I'm done.
Thank you very, very much, Vicky.
Yeah, so thank you so much for our wonderful audience, and last but not least, our wonderful panelists. It has been such a great and engaging night, and like as you stated, I hope that everyone leaving today can kind of carry that momentum of what Diane was saying, that we are more than just our colors. So like when you are following us on Twitter or anything like that, do ask like what's our jobs, what's our likes and interests, instead of just asking like, can you talk about racism? Because we are more than just racism. So thank you so much for everyone who attended today, and for the wonderful team on with the Douglas. So thank you so much, everyone, and good night.